Thanks, Phyllis. That was great. I think that set us up really nicely for a lot of the things we're going to be talking about here. The factory, I know, we'll come back to more than once during the day. So we wanted to indulge ourselves a little bit now for a minute and talk about us, because we like talking about us. But I think there are some important things going on in the industry in general around content technologies that we wanted to revisit and give our view on, help you understand where we're heading. You'll have noticed, if you're sharp-eyed, that some of our messaging has changed a little bit on the website and elsewhere in this poster. We're an AI company, and this isn't news, by the way. What occurred to us, kept occurring to us in recent interactions with the market, and when we were out at trade shows talking to people, is that we spent a lot of time as a company talking about the problems that we solve for our customers and why we thought that was important and the value of doing it and all those good things. We didn't really talk very much about how hard that is and how doing what we do is actually driven by the fact that we're an AI company. We kind of took it a little bit for granted. So I wanted to talk a little bit about AI, about our view on AI, where it comes from, where we're heading with that, and some trends in the industry, trends in the science and technology around AI that I think will give you a feeling for where we're heading with our core technology. So, how many of you have found yourself in this position in the last 2 years? Like 4 of you? This is something that doesn't happen very much, right? This is increasingly something that we never have to do. I've only ever opened the hood of my car to fill up the washer on for the wipers. Mine has like this plastic cover over the engine, so I don't even know how to take that off. So I'm quite a technical person, but I don't go in there, and I don't need to go in there, right? Similarly, I was starting to have this conversation with my children as we were driving along, explaining what this thing does and how it works. And I was halfway through and I don't know whether they were listening or not, but anyway, I was halfway through this long description of how this thing works when I realized that actually they would never need to know that, right? My kids are 15 and 13. By the time they start driving, you won't need one of these things. There won't be gearboxes. So, you know, this thing is another thing that's disappearing. Similarly, parking. I learned to drive in London. If you learn to drive in London, you get really, really good at parking because the parking spaces are usually about 2 or 3 inches bigger than the car that you're trying to get in them. Parking is a skill that is also, you know, becoming redundant. My car can park now. I don't need to park. My children don't need to learn to park. We don't need to bother with this skill anymore. This is a nice graphic from Tesla, which shows how good the technology is right now at staying in the lane as you're driving along. They're already significantly better than humans because they don't have Facebook and they don't argue about what's on the radio or whatever. So they can do a better job. They're better at this than humans already. And there's so many tasks out there now where machines are better than us at doing these tasks. And we're happy to give them a responsibility for those simple tasks. The question is, where's that borderline? We don't need to do any of these kinds of things anymore. There's a whole bunch of things that we don't need to do anymore in the world where AI is there and it's available and can do an increasing amount of things for us. In our world around content, this means that automation is everywhere. And I think one of the things that we have to start to get our heads around as an industry is, what does that model look like? So, Ulrich.
Thank you. And that's very much how we see that model of collaboration. It needs to be a collaboration of machine and human. And the nice property of the AI really is the machine can do the kind of, the grunt work, the mundane stuff that humans just aren't really good at, kind of going through pages and pages and pages of content, looking at every detail. That's not a great job for a human, but a human is someone who can, kind of really polish a message and kind of, add the human touch to content. So we very much see that as a model of collaboration, and freeing up humans by having AI support them on some of the grunt work. So we'll talk a lot about analytics and governance in the next 2 days. And one thing that we're seeing in that space is that there is a lot of analytics in the content space that is not really about the content. It's about content consumption. So, you have all these, cool technology out there on, SEO, on targeting, on stuff like social media monitoring, web analytics. Lots and lots of metrics on how content is consumed, what happens to content after it's published. Very little on, the actual content itself. What are properties of my content that I can tell from the content itself? So there's a big problem with that. It's all rear view mirror. You can, you only know once you have published your content. Only then can these tools give you any insight on how it's performing. So that falls short on telling you how the content is going to perform once you have published it. And that's really where when we talk about analytics, what we're delivering is kind of the next step on that. So instead of having analytics about content consumption, we are giving you analytics on the content itself, and that allows you to make the next step, to really have predictive analytics, to predict performance of content after it's been published, before you publish it. Andrew.
Yeah, so this comes everywhere as you start to measure how your content's working. You're looking at A/B testing. You're looking at all the analytics out there. I think it's key that we start to think about how can we get ahead of that game, right? There are a lot of people doing really smart things with measuring their content, but how can we get ahead of that? And that's the kind of thing that we'll be showing you that we're aligning ourselves with, is analytics that can give you a leading indicator for success. So as we think about technology and AI, as we've started to talk about AI, I increasingly get asked to talk about AI just as a thing, independently of Acrolinx. And I often get asked this kind of question, someone often with a book in their hand, or a kind of virtual book in their hand, done some research. And they come to me and say, yeah, but Andrew, where's the actual AI in Acrolinx? And I don't really know how to answer. I know the person isn't an expert in AI, but they've understood something around AI, and I don't really know what they know. So I don't really know how to answer this question. What I'll do instead is probably take a few steps back and give you an understanding of where we are and where we come from, and our approach as to using AI to solve the problems that we try to solve. And I hope that helps. If it doesn't, then we do have time for questions. But I think this will give you a path of where we come from and where we're heading. So just a little bit about us from the history, because it's been a while. We've been around for over 15 years. We are a spin-off from the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, DFKI. Shareholders include these kinds of companies. They're not shareholders because they expect a dividend anytime soon. They're shareholders because they want to keep track of the research that's going on at DFKI. DFKI is a limited company, but it does contract research. When Google became a shareholder, it was big news. This was a couple of years ago from TechCrunch, as they were looking at specific technologies. And one of the key technologies they identified was the natural language processing technologies that come out of the DFKI. So our technology was built here. I ran a research project at the DFKI before I founded Acrolinx. So that's just a little bit. You can look up DFK and what they're doing now, doing loads of cool stuff. We still work with them. This is when we say AI, you know, it's really easy to add AI to your name or to your logos or to your posters, but when we say we do AI, we mean it. And we know what we're talking about. The other thing I would say is, you know, sometimes people outside the industry, they look at what we do and they say, but we used to say we sold software to software companies because that was kind of a big thing that it seemed to be most of our first customers were software companies. Now it's pretty much true that if you look at the companies, all of the companies out there who you would list in the top 10 companies doing AI, they're all customers of ours. So it says something, I think, about our AI that we have something that they can't or don't want to build themselves. We have a core expertise that they respect enough to stump up cash for. A little bit about AI in general. When people say to me, where's the real AI? I think what typically they're talking about is this big data kind of machine learning kind of idea that most people seem to equate with AI. And Ulrich is going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But firstly, I wanted to talk a little bit about why a simple big data machine learning approach doesn't really work for the challenge that you guys are facing and that we want to help you with. It is an approach that we use, but it's not the answer to everything. And it's one reason why there aren't 100 million companies out there doing what we do. This was an article out from earlier this year, it's about a month ago. Research has shown, surprise, surprise, that if you have an AI engine that learns from the internet, it will learn what the internet thinks, right? And it turns out that most AI programs that simply learn from the internet inherit all the racial, gender stereotypes that are out there on the internet. And there are companies that are struggling with this, who built their AI engines based on learning from the internet, who now struggle to actually be able to control those and allow companies to be able to decide how they want the engines to work. There's a company that does HR content called Text.io, really cool technology. But one of the challenges they have is that if you want to write an HR posting, and you want to promote diversity, and therefore you want to go for a specific profile of person, the data will tell you to reach out to those kinds of people using all these stereotypes and using these prejudices. That may not be the message you want to project as a brand. All right? So you can try this at home, right? If you type in anything like this, you will be confronted with the prejudices that the internet has. All right? Now, this is funny, and this is kind of okay. That's what you expect from the internet. But imagine this was your search portal on your website, or imagine this was inside your content that you were responsible for. Then you have a brand issue, right? You, as a brand, have an agenda. You can't just learn from the internet. You have something to say. You have a personality to project. You have brand equity to protect. You cannot just learn stuff and it'll be kind of okay. So that combination, and we'll talk about brand and all these things more, but that kind of combination is something that is a real challenge for using AI technologies in those kinds of environments. The great enterprise content tells your story, the brand's story, in a way that your audience wants to hear it. And that's what we mean when we talk about on brand and on target. I'll talk more about that later. But that's really the challenge, and I think that's the kind of thing that when people say, you know, why don't you just do everything with big data and machine learning approaches, this is kind of the reason why that doesn't work as simply as you might think out of the box. Ulrich, can you talk a little bit more about the details?
Sure. So I think the examples Andrew gave, you know, kind of make a pretty compelling case why, you know, you can't just learn everything from the internet. And this is actually a challenge that, that there has been a lot of progress in the past few years on, deep learning and learning from big data. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with that. But there's really this fundamental problem in there that it's very hard to kind of give, external input or change certain parameters of that. So one example that's out there is, you all know these self-driving cars. Andrew showed the Tesla slide. So they're learning from lots and lots and lots of data from, actual people driving cars through actual traffic. One problem that they have seen is now, if for example, a rule of traffic changes, and a certain aspect of how you're supposed to drive is changing by like outside legislation. There's really not a single switch inside your AI model where you can tell the AI to certainly behave differently. You have to learn everything again, and there is not any data out there on how you're supposed to drive after the traffic change. So that's kind of an inherent problem in all of these big data-driven machine learning approaches. But fortunately, AI has a much broader set of tools available, and this is kind of what's in Acrolinx DNA. So we have from the beginning we have kind of combined lots of different AI techniques, from knowledge-based techniques and rule-based techniques, learning-based methods, into kind of delivering the functionality that we deliver today. So it's a broad spectrum of technologies that we combine, and in the end, to kind of fulfill this mission of delivering this functionality, which can help you to really create effective content according to your goals. So this ability to set the goals of how do you want your content to be, what audience do you want your content to be, optimized for. That's something you can only do with this kind of unique combination of different AI technologies that we have in Acrolinx. But there is a lot of cool stuff happening in research out there on deep learning, especially kind of using deep learning methods on natural language processing tasks. We are following that quite closely. So first through DFKI, but also, for example, the work that Chris Manning is doing here at Stanford with his group. Lots of really interesting stuff coming out where we see a lot of potential to add, kind of enhance and build out the capabilities that Acrolinx has, so that you can get to this kind of self-learning system, because certain aspects of what we're doing you can learn not from the internet, but from kind of the actual brand-specific content that we're working on. And we see ourselves in a very fortunate position there, because the way that Acrolinx is embedded in content processes, we have a unique position where we can see kind of the creation process of enterprise content. And this is really the data that you need to learn from to apply these AI technologies. You can't, these learning-based AI technologies, you can't learn it from the internet, but you can learn it from how the content changes in your editorial processes. So that's where we see ourselves in a very fortunate position, because we can learn from this, from your data for you, and then deliver something that is very specific to the content creation processes you have inside your company. So we have some very cool stuff that we're going to announce there over the next 12 months. Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear again, this is not in the next release of Acrolinx. This is stuff that we're working on, and I think really exciting, and gives us another level of intelligence on top of the platform to enrich the experience. Time.
Very good.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk. Enough about us. I wanted to talk a little bit about you, and I think some of the challenges that we see coming up over and over again as we engage around content. And if you've heard me talk, things always come in threes. So this is going to come in threes as well. I wanted to talk about 3 kinds of experience that I think are driving content initiatives in a really interesting way. The first one is around the user experience. And this started out, I think, in the software industry, but has become something that we see more pervasively. You see this interaction between content and design, I think, in a really interesting way, and maybe often the interaction is maybe a positive way of looking at it. There's often a tension between content and design, sometimes even, pitched battles between content and design, but I think there's increasingly there's an understanding that these things are important. And this is a quote from Jonathan at Facebook. Facebook's done some really interesting work in bringing together design and content into a process that I think is really was groundbreaking. I think a lot of people are now moving in a similar direction. But this I think is really cool. And it's really here about the drivers around content experience, the types of content. And this started out in the software business, but in fact is now, we see it pervasively across all the industries we're working in. The product, the way the product interacts, whether it's a car or a banking app or an ATM or a piece of software, that interaction goes through all these pieces of content. And they really influence that process in an incredibly strong way. Doing this wrong, I think has enormous risks for the business. It's not just about being good or bad at content. It's actually that there's an understanding this is a direct link between that and the business. And I know that looking at you, Ben, and others are going to talk about this all the way through the day. There's been this realization that the one thing that powers an outstanding user experience is content, especially as it scales. The second thing, I think, and these are in no particular order, depends what kind of organization you are and what phase of the life cycle of the company you're in. But the second thing we see increasingly is also this need to create the brand experience that's really, really strong. A lot of mature companies are being disrupted in their industry by other stuff going on around them, by smaller companies, by other companies muscling into their space. The one thing they have to do well is their brand. That's what they have that no one can take away from them. And so there's this realization that doing this well, projecting your brand, projecting a consistent brand personality, is something that has real value to the company. And we all know companies that do this well, that have a strong brand. You can look up the most valuable brands in the world. You all know which companies have that strong personality. Most of them are customers of ours. You look at that feeling for how do we project that well, right? Telling a really good brand story is more about having a relationship than it was, right? So it's really about how can you get that feeling that by always speaking with one voice, how can I then develop a personality where, no, I'm talking to this company now. I know that I'm talking to this company. The relationship is the way that makes that happen. And these great stories, there's this idea that somehow being able to tell those stories across all the parts of the process is really, really important. The brand is kind of an overlay over all these, over the top of all these things. The way in which you tell those stories, of course, you need great stories. Nothing replaces a really good story. But of course, it's not just about what it says. It's about the way that you say it. So the consistent brand voice is really key. And I think we come back to this realization again. You'll notice a theme here. The things that powers this great brand experience at scale. I mean, you can do this once with a shiny video, but the way to do this well at scale is, again, through content. And finally, I think the most important driver, the most important, I think, initiative that's motivating a lot of content initiatives is this need to do better at the customer experience. People have kind of got wise to the fact that actually our customers don't care very much about us. I know that you care about Acrolinx and everything, thank you. But in fact, when you collect the data, people will move from one brand to another ruthlessly, right? They don't really care about the brand very much. And the way that you keep people engaged is by not disappointing them, right? It might sound like a low bar, but in fact, there's a lot of talk about creating, awareness with fantastic videos and campaigns of all these things. In fact, that's just the start of a relationship. And there's an understanding that being good at this over time, Gartner had this quote, consistency is the new delight. I don't know if I've used that somewhere, but it's that kind of idea of actually being good over time is so much better than being really, really good once. Customers will move, 25% of customers will leave your brand after just one bad experience. The upside, of course, is this is an opportunity to excel. And lots of research has shown, Phyllis mentioned this, that the companies that do this well consistently outperform the market. And we've done some research which we haven't kept up to date, but actually the companies that use Acrolinx also outperform the market. Just a coincidence, could be, maybe not. Okay, so we're seeing companies moving away as they get more analytics. They're moving away from this notion of this very ordered, structured pipeline because the analytics is telling them, this is a picture that I stole from Phyllis's colleague, Erin Provey at Serious Decisions, who, when they look at the analytics, they suddenly realize that they're not in control. The customer is in control. They decide what they read and where they go, having read one piece of content, to go to the next piece of content. It's entirely up to them. They have Google or other search engines that they can use to go and find whatever content they like. They're not in your little world. They're in a world that they can control. And so the best you can do is influence that process. Your content can be inflection points to guide the customer, to influence them in some direction, but it's not in control. But we've already heard this today from Phyllis. Content doesn't just appear by magic. When you're running a campaign, or you're looking at building a support organization, or looking at new release for your product, the content doesn't just appear by magic. Someone has to write it. And so often we see that people plan the whole process of publication and they plan almost every other aspect of the process apart from content creation. Customer experience is, of course, at scale, all fueled by content. These three initiatives, and I think they're things that we see increasingly being the drivers for us getting into conversations with companies, is there is a driver, there's an existing thing. Phyllis talked about the fear of transformation. Quite often when we go into a conversation, we're not encouraging people to change anything in what they do. They've already decided they need to transform. They need to excel at user experience or customer experience or the brand. They need to be better at doing this. And we're simply saying to them that you need some platform to be able to do that at scale. You can't simply want it to happen and somehow magic it up just by willpower. So that, if you like, is the value proposition, is that they're the drivers. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how that works in practice. When we talk about supporting these initiatives, what does that really mean? When we talk about a content strategy and how do you make that happen, these are the things I think that the challenges that we address on brand, on target, and at scale. Coincidentally, there are three of them. On brand really means who you are. What kind of organization do you want to be? And many of the organizations we work with are actually changing the kind of organization that they want to be. There are all sorts of VPs at IBM now who come into the office wearing jeans, which was inconceivable, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. It's a trivial example, but it's an example of how the brand is transforming itself. Look at the way Microsoft has transformed itself from where it was in the days of Windows Vista and those kinds of things, to the personality it projects in its products now. That is a transformation that the company has decided to make in order to, in some cases, in order to survive and maintain its position in the market. That brand is an incredibly important part of the business being successful. And the way you project that, a big part of the way you want to project that comes through the language that you choose to project it with, and the tone of voice and the words that you think about and where you're using them. The on-target is the opposite side of that coin. So whilst we talk about the customer experience, putting the customer in the center of it, and you're looking at the target audiences, and you saw on Phyllis's map and all her diagrams, an understanding of the target audience and modeling those things with personas, and that's all great, but then of course you need to make that happen. And you need to think about creating a connection successfully, really actually effectively doing whatever it is you want to do, whether it's telling a story or in some transactional context, solving a customer problem or keeping the customer happy in some other way. Understanding the target audience is just as important as communicating your brand. So they're two sides of the same coin, right? You don't want to just disappear and just be focused on your target audience, because then you're just like everybody else, and you run the risk of being commoditized and some competitor disrupting your business, taking your business. On the other hand, you can't just be about yourself. I'm doing it now, I'm just talking about myself. But normally, I'm much more interested in you than I am in myself, right? So there's those two sides of the coin. There's the target and the brand, and they work together. They have to work together in balance for this to be successful. And the final thing I think that people often forget, the key part of this on-target piece is to use the language that your audience understands, or whatever that audience. Understand them and understand the language you need to use to reach them. And I think one key part of this whole challenge is not to do it this once. It's kind of easy. It's easy to do really sharp, fantastic, lighthouse content that's really on brand and really hits the target audience, and to do that once. And there's great examples of this out there. We often talk about the Jean-Claude Van Damme video, the Volvo video, where he's doing the splits between two trucks as he goes backwards down a runway. Great piece of awareness building content, but it's worth nothing if it isn't followed up by a process thereafter which continues to accompany the customer down the journey. And so doing this at scale is where this gets really hard, and where, to be honest, is where you need the technology to support it. If there was no need for scale, then there would be no need for Acrolinx. Right? You could hire 3 people and they could write everything and do everything that you need to do within the company. But life's not that simple. And so this idea of consistency being the new delight might sound like it's setting the bar low, but in fact it's something that in this ruthless world is really, really important. So those, if you like, are the goals we want to set. I'm just going to talk very quickly about how we position what we do into some buckets that I think will be helpful for the rest of the conversation that we'll have. Again, 3 things. This time they start with the same letter. Goals, guidance, and governance. Even better when they start with the same letter. I just love it. So we talk about, and we'll talk about what we do in these terms. So we'll keep coming back to this. When we talk about content strategy, what we're talking about is setting goals for the content that we have. In other words, what are the key words and phrases that we care about, that encapsulate our brand, that are hot buttons for our target audience, things that we don't want to say because they are risk issues or compliant issues associated with them, things we don't want to say because our competitor uses those words, or things we don't want to say because the customer won't understand them. The whole tone of voice that you want to project for your target audience. the different target audiences you might have, all of those things, all of that strategy, that thinking that you have is really, really important, as Phyllis has told us this morning. But it's kind of not going to go anywhere unless you make it actionable. And so one of the things we're about is taking those specifications, the brand guidelines, the audience target, the target audience specifications, all of the pieces of branding, the brand guidelines, style guidelines, tone of voice things that you have, of taking all of those and capturing them in our platform so that you can make them happen. Because just writing them down and hoping that they happen, or training the team and hoping that they'll follow all the rules is not something that's going to work at scale. So we talk about goals as the first piece. It's the prerequisite for being successful, is understanding what you want to get done. And then, in terms of making it actionable, we talk about two things: guidance and governance. In the old days, we were known for giving guidance directly, or really it wasn't guidance in those days, it was for finding errors in the content that you had. So we would say, these things are wrong. We're going to look for all of the examples of this particular thing, like the passive, the use of the passive in your content. We're going to say, every time you use passive, it's going to be wrong. We're going to mark it and say, don't use the passive. Then we got a little bit, we went a little bit soft on that, and we started to say, can you avoid the passive? You might want to not always do it. And there's some great stuff written about the passive. Jeff Pullum wrote, our friend, linguist, wrote this really good article about why avoiding the passive is just a nonsense idea. In fact, it's much more nuanced than that. There are whole cases where, anyway, I'm not going to talk about this in much detail, but the idea was that we would have rules, and the rules would be right or wrong. You would follow the rules. If you didn't follow the rules, you were wrong. And so we would talk about rules. The system was full of rules. I think we've moved on from that for two reasons. Firstly, the rules are never right, or they're never 100% right or wrong. And so what we've tried to do with the choice of the word guidance is very careful. It's designed to suggest that what we're trying to do is to help you, is to help the content creators do a better job. So it's that idea of there's your friendly copy editor standing behind you going, they'd never say that's wrong, don't do the passive there. They would say, you might want to look at that, that's a bit confusing the way you've done that. You could think about maybe reworking that bit. And you'll see, hopefully, as we show some demos tomorrow in different parts of the experience, how this all fits together. So the guidance piece has really changed in our interaction, but also as we've added more nuance in terms of tone of voice support and all those other things, guidance has become a different mode of interaction. And the second part is the governance piece, which I think we'll talk about a lot, and Philip will show you a really nice demo of how this works in action tomorrow. The guidance piece is driven by the analytics feature that we'll be releasing. I'm going to skip over these in the interest of time, because I've talked about a lot of this. The goals piece is really about content goals, and I think the key aspect of that is aligning with business goals. They're not content goals for themselves. They're not important because for any reason other than they're aligned with the business goals. I just want to say a few things about governance, just very, very quickly. Governance, unfortunately, I couldn't get this into 3. It's going to be 4. There are 4 reasons why governance is really, really important. The first thing is visibility and transparency as an organization, right? It gives you what we want to be able to know is, are we safe? Do we have everything where it needs to be? Where do we have a problem? The second thing is it promotes collaboration. You can work better as a team. You can work better as an ecosystem with agencies, with all the people involved in creating content, if you have a common language to talk about when stuff is good, when stuff is not so good. If you have that way of scoring and the ability to understand whether content's good or not, you can drive all sorts of automation directly off that scoring. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And I think really, really important about governance is this ability to talk about value. And when we show the analytics stuff, I think you'll see that we've put a lot of effort into not just scoring for itself, but scoring related to other goals that you might have as a business. And that having analytics as a language, governance is a way of having a language to talk about why this is important and to what extent it's important. Ulrich, I've given you about 2 minutes to get through this.
Oh no, we have 10 minutes. That's great. So I'm going to talk about some of the great stuff that we're going to release in the next few days. And the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of Acrolinx everywhere. So we've heard a lot about also the questions this morning after Phyllis' session. Content really is created in lots and lots and lots of places in an organization, and to deliver on our vision of supporting all of these content creation processes, no matter where they are in an organization, means that we need to have integrations into all of the tools that are being used in all of these different places to create content. So around 18 months ago or so, we launched a new model to deliver the guidance that Andrew just talked about. That's our Acrolinx Sidebar. And I just want to review kind of what we have in terms of sidebar integrations and announce some new stuff that's just coming out. So, but before I do that, I wanted to talk about a few of the key kind of advantages that we see by moving our guidance to Sidebar. So the first thing is that Sidebar really allows us to build integrations in a with a consistent and really easy to use user experience in a manageable way. If you want to be integrated in dozens and dozens and dozens of places, it needs to be something that's scalable, that can be maintained. And it also needs to be something that not only we can do, but also where customers or partners can build Acrolinx integrations in whatever tools they may be using, or in-house systems that you want Acrolinx functionality in. So Sidebar really makes that easy, and we have invested quite a bit in also developer support for partners, for example, building integrations with Sidebar. So that's one key aspect. The second nice aspect of having these Sidebar integrations is that it really gives us kind of a hook into all of these fragmented tools that you find across the content silos. So this is also one reason why we talk about Acrolinx as a platform. Having these integrations in all of these places where content is created and pulling them together into the Acrolinx platform allows us to provide the governance that Andrew just talked about. So we can kind of create an analytics and governance layer on top of all of these fragmented tool silos, and really enable that collaboration also between people in these different silos, because Acrolinx makes it easy to align all of these different silos across the common goals that we have. And the third one, and this is something that's very interesting, is that Sidebar also gives us a kind of a conduit to deliver additional insights into those tools. So we obviously deliver the Acrolinx guidance in there, but we are also building integrations now where we're pulling in insights from other systems into Sidebar. So for example, search tools, information on findability from SEO systems. You can pull that right into Sidebar and make that information available there. But there's lots of more possibilities if you have kind of other systems in your enterprise that provide information that you would like to have at your fingertips when content is created. We can pull that right in there, and that's a very interesting avenue to kind of deliver additional insights to people creating content. So just a quick review of what we have in terms of Sidebar integrations, and it really underlines this idea of kind of covering all the silos in an organization. So we have web content management integrations, Adobe Experience Manager and WordPress. We are covering the Office tools from Word, PowerPoint, Google Docs and Sheets, Outlook. we have, and this is something that that is very interesting for this idea of kind of having Acrolinx functionality everywhere. We have built some browser plugins for Firefox and Chrome, and that really allows you to have Acrolinx in virtually kind of any web application that you're using from these browsers. A Microsoft Edge plugin is coming in the next few months, but with these two integrations, you can already kind of virtually any web application where content is created, you can Acrolinx using these browser plugins. Very powerful. Then we have integrations with lots of tools for kind of more technical product content like FrameMaker or Oxygen or Madcap. And we are announcing the Sidebar edition of XMetal, which is going to be released tomorrow. So that's kind of complementing our tool support there. Increasingly, we're also moving into support for kind of more developer-oriented tools. So this is Microsoft Visual Studio Code, where we have built a Sidebar integration. We have Adobe Creative Cloud, so InDesign, InCopy, so that you can check your kind of final copy that you're getting ready for layout in there. And we are releasing an integration with Sketch end of next week, which is also a very interesting aspect because Sketch is something that typically UX designers use kind of early on in the product development phase. So that kind of gives you the opportunity to. We've had lots of customer requests for a Sketch integration. This gives you a chance to really start early in product development, product lifecycle, and kind of starting to get your language right at the beginning. Okay. Very happy to announce the Acrolinx 5.2 release, and I want to cover the kind of two main features that we have in there. First one is conversational tone, and this is something we have been working on for quite a while. So, Andrew talked about this. Where is the actual AI in Acrolinx? So if you want to look for one of the places where you find lots of AI, then the support we have for tone of voice and tone of voice guidance is one of the places where that kind of really is embodied in the product. This is something that's very hard to do without AI technology, and so we are quite proud of what we've done there. And the interesting part there is there's some tools out there that can kind of give you metrics on tone of voice, so they can, for a given piece of content, kind of score it and say, okay, so you're here in terms of, what kind of tone of voice this is. What no one else can do is really give you guidance on, okay, how do I change a given piece of content to, have a desired tone of voice. And this is what we have started doing last year. So last year we released our first version of Acrolinx with support for tone of voice guidance for clarity. And what we're adding in 5.2 is an additional dimension for tone of voice around conversational tone. And the really, so to come back to the, to our 3Gs, it's really kind of the complete cycle of goals, guidance, and governance. So you can set your goals around, okay, do I want my tone to be conversational or not? You have the guidance right in the sidebar, where authors are guided to, if you're striving for conversational tone, they're guided to, actually change their content to be more conversational. And we have the governance aspects where you can get the whole metrics and analytics around. Okay, so for the content that I have, where is it on that scale? The next big thing is we have talked a lot about analytics, and so this really is kind of the cornerstone of this upcoming release. We have built kind of our next generation version of the analytics engine that's in our product. We have had analytics in the product for a long time, but so far that's kind of very much focused on a more transactional view, not so much focused around kind of your content and also your the business value that content is driving. This is kind of the key aspect of what we are changing with this next generation, is that we're incorporating that view of, okay, how do you, what's your view of the content, and what's the business value characteristics of that content, and making that transparent right in Acrolinx. So I'm going to walk through some of the features in that next generation analytics, and we're going to see a live demo of that tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m., for more details. So first thing is we have a comprehensive set of built-in, very powerful dashboards. And this is also a step up from our previous generation. These are live dashboards. You have live filtering and no more static reporting, but instead you have nice live dashboards. And they kind of cover all the aspects from content quality to business value to tracking usage of Acrolinx in different areas of the organization. All of that available as kind of built-in dashboards in the product. A very important new set of capabilities is around the ability to group content along dimensions that make sense for you. So Acrolinx can now give you a view of the content along the lines that kind of you think about your content. So you might be thinking across along campaigns, or along teams that are creating content, or along product groups, or however what your view of the content that you're creating is. You can define that, and we're going to run it a little bit over, but we started late. So you can define those content groups right in Acrolinx, and then track the development of content in that group over time. So that's a very significant new capability that we're adding. The second one is you can set benchmarks for these content groups. You may have different different goals for different groups of content, and then track how that content is developing over time against the benchmark that you're setting. So also very powerful to see, am I moving the needle in the right direction, and you can see that right in the product. I briefly mentioned the live filtering and drill down that we have. So you have kind of live filtering capabilities across all of these dashboards, which really allows you to kind of slice and dice the data and do analysis along any sort of dimension that you're interested in. Very powerful new capability is the ability to create custom dashboards right in the product. So you can create dashboards in the product, and you can also connect this to content consumption metrics, for example, that you get from outside systems. So you can pull in data from, for example, your web analytics, and correlate that with the content quality data that we have. Very powerful capabilities. And you can also, this has been a long-standing request from a number of customers, the ability to just have scheduled and automated reports where you can get like a copy of certain reports emailed on a regular basis in a number of different formats. So this is going to be available end of next week, May 12th, as a release, and we're going to do a live demo tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m. Looking forward to that. Andrew.
Okay, so just wrapping up, a few takeaways for you to discuss over coffee that I hope is now outside as we speak. Deb's nodding. So I think what we see is this, this excellence around brand experience, customer experience. I think this idea of doing this, the importance of doing this in terms of brand and target, and doing this at scale. And I think, to some extent, we regard you as the kind of the people who have to do all the hard work. You're the heroes that have to make all this happen. This is something that, I'm always full of respect of how hard this really is to do. It's easy to talk about, but it's really, really hard to do. So we like to see ourselves as providing a platform to make this happen. We talk about what we think is important. Hopefully that resonates with what your organization sees as important. If that's true, then we think that our goal in life is to provide a platform to make it happen. And to make that happen, we need to support the 3 Gs, the goals, the guidance, and governance for you to be successful. And we're at your service. Thank you very much.